Hello and welcome to Prepare for Battle, Writing Fight Scenes. If you've wandered across this event and wondered what it's all about, today we're discussing how to write realistic fight scenes to support NaNoWriMo, also known as National Novel Writing Month. NaNoWriMo takes place every November when writers all around the world attempt to write 50,000 words in 30 days. Harris County Public Library is supporting writers by hosting programs like this to help keep everyone motivated. Those of you who have tuned into our previous events may remember that I am Amy Campbell, the branch manager at the Catherine Tyre at Bear Creek Library, and also an author. And today I am joined by Whit McClendon, who is not only a local author, but also a martial artist and instructor. Thanks for joining us today, Whit.
I am happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to have you here. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and the books you've written, and Taylor can take us to the next slide.
Okay. Well, let's see. My name is Whit McClendon. I run Jade Mountain Martial Arts here in Katy. We've been around here for about 18 years. And for the last 40 years or so, I've trained in praying mantis kung fu, kickboxing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, tai chi, various, a little bit of judo, lots of things that involve punching, kicking, throwing, that kind of thing.
Awesome. So you stay very busy then.
Yeah. And then there's the old author part. Let's see. I started in 1993, and it took 20 years to get my first epic fantasy done because I'm slow. And then I published my first epic fantasy book in 2014, and I've averaged about a book a year since then, epic fantasy, urban fantasy, and I'm having a blast.
Awesome. Yeah, fantasy takes a while to write, so we're not quite like the genres that have the skinny books that can, pump them out every couple of months. So good on you for doing one a year even.
Yeah, I feel like I could go a lot faster if I actually sat my butt in the chair and wrote a little bit, but it's there's always a lot to do.
Yeah, well, and if you weren't, being busy with the martial arts and the family and, all the adulting stuff you have to do.
All the adulting, yeah.
That always gets in the way of the fun part, the writing. Well, tell us a little bit about your current writing project. I know you're not doing NaNoWriMo, but I do know you're working on something else right now.
Right. It actually was a NaNoWriMo that kind of propelled this current series that I'm working on. I'm working on a modern urban fantasy called the Grimm Fairy Chronicles. I have 3 books in that series right now. And the first one I wrote a few pages and put it away for a long time. And then NaNoWriMo came up, and I thought, you know what? Let me dust that off and give it a shot. I was only able to get 30,000 words into the story at that point by the end of November, but I had gained enough momentum in it that I decided to keep going with it. And I ended up finishing the story, putting it out as a book. And I was pleasantly surprised. It seemed that there was a lot of really good response to it. People enjoyed the snarky main character and the situations going on there. And so I have done a couple of more in that series. And my current project is book 4 in that same series. And there's kind of a new love interest there, although there's a whole lot of they're trying to figure some stuff out. But it's the main story is a Fey assassin. He is a fairy creature who is tasked with keeping the balance of good and evil in our area. And he's, I don't know, he's kind of a jerk in a lot of ways. He has his own moral code, and it has nothing to do with humans.
He's kind of a little bit hard-boiled.
He is a little hard-boiled. Yeah, he's not one to be nice when being not nice would be faster and more to the point.
Well, awesome. Thanks for telling us about that. And for our local viewers, you can also check it out from our library. This is my personal copy, though. You can't have that one. That's mine. But yeah, it's available at our library for checkout. I know there was a copy at Bear Creek because I was looking at it yesterday. And also, people who are interested in this book should know it also takes place in Houston. And I know I always love reading books that take place in Houston because it's like, I know that setting that they're talking about. So that's kind of like a fun thing. So yeah. If you like to read books that are by a local artist and in a local setting, check it out. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and charge into the reason that many of you might be watching this event, and that is to learn how to help you craft your fight scenes. Let's go ahead to the next slide. And since we have Whit here, we're going to start with his expertise because, as you've heard, he knows a lot about this. So he's going to tell us more about some tips for writing close quarters combat like martial arts and hand-to-hand combat. So Whit, what would you suggest for people who don't have time to go do martial arts training and like all they have seen is like maybe like the WWE or something like that? How can they write these types of fights realistically?
Well, I think the main thing about it is to learn about it in whatever way is easiest for you. I mean, there is so much available on the internet at this point. YouTube is your friend. And, you know, most people know somebody who is training in some type of martial arts. And so there's a lot of different ways, but the thing is that you need to, as an author, understand enough about what's going on so that you can put it down on the page. And so, you know, checking out stuff on YouTube, checking out, looking around at websites. I mean, of course, I would always recommend going and training in some martial art, but you know, a lot of people maybe that's just not in the cards for them, and it's not something that they are able to do or want to do. But just to be able to gain an understanding of what can be done and what can't be done. And you know, as a fantasy author, there's not much that can't be done, but it still has to follow certain rules. And
because
so
physics usually still apply.
it usually still applies, yeah. And
Well,
so,
awesome.
that's the thing, is really just, you know, why I think Stephen King said, in order to be an author, you need to read a lot and write a lot. And this is why we read a lot. Read other books that have the same kind of combat that you are interested in putting out there, and get a feel for what other authors do. See what resonates and see what doesn't. You know, I know I was reading some stuff recently that I was like, oh, that's good. And then conversely, a totally different book I was reading and I thought exactly the opposite. Oh, that's bad, you know. And so, but if you're not exposed to enough of it, then you'll have a more limited pool to draw from. So read a lot about, you know, the kind of combat you're interested in writing. Look it up and ask a lot of questions.
And you know, I like that you mentioned, you know, people getting experience in it, because even though, you know, somebody might not be able to, you know, commit to it for a long time, but even if they do it for maybe a couple of months, if they want to, like, you know, say maybe their main character, you know, has a martial arts background, that might just be helpful in that case. Because I often see a lot of authors, well, more of the authors who are, you know, more mid-list are making, you know, quite a bit of money from this. You know, they'll go to Ireland so that they can be immersed in the setting of the next book they're writing, and then they can like write it off on their taxes.
That's deductible, yeah.
Yeah. So that's great and all, but we also need to think about it for like the meat and potatoes of things like this, of your character's actions, because if this is part of your main character, it's really great to have that knowledge. And I'm a bit of a hypocrite with this, because one of my main characters, like, his favorite thing is baking, which is not combat, although I'll probably find a way to make it combat. And I am not a baker, but my characters kind of run things. He was like, baking is my thing, and I was like, I hate you because I don't know about baking, and I've got to watch baking shows.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely learning how to do things is great. And I was also thinking, as you were talking about like some of the different martial arts classes. Long ago, I took like a women's self-defense class.
Yep.
And like, number one, that's just helpful for people to know in general. But that also, for a writer, teaches you like a lot of like the tender bits of people, and like if your character needs to escape, like how they could do that. And like you learn that, you know, the nose is a really great place to hit, or go for the eyes, all those things. So people could think about doing that. Number one, you'll learn some stuff that could help you, you know, help save your life. And number two, it's just good to know for your writing, because that could help any writer, whether you're fantasy or writing like contemporary literary fiction.
Absolutely. Two things I was going to say as that came to mind. One of my favorite memories. My all-time favorite author is Dennis L. McKiernan, and I'm fortunate to be acquainted with him on a certain level. You know, he's read my books and he likes the new ones especially, and so we talk back and forth every so often. When we first met, it was at a convention, gosh, 20 plus years ago. And one of the things he asked me about was, how would you palm strike somebody? And he explained a scene to me and said, I have a young lady who in the blink of an eye vanished and went into some warrior society in a fantasy world and spent months there, but then through whatever happenstance blinks back into her real life, where she wasn't a warrior. And then she's accosted by her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend. He grabs her wrist as she's turning away, and she turns around and lays into him with a palm strike. And the very first time and by the way, I'm still to this day a huge fanboy of Dennis L. McKiernan. He is the
That's awesome.
bomb, baby. Oh, so I even think about this and I'm like, oh my God, it was so much fun. And so we're in this big fantasy convention in Corpus Christi, and he just reached out and grabbed my wrist and said, all right, now he grabs her like this, and she's turning away. So what do? How does this work? And so I turned around and I showed him how to do, how a palm strike would look. And he asked me to do it a couple of times. And then he filed it away, and we went on about our discussion. And I don't know that he ever published the story that he was talking about. But the thing is that every martial artist that I know, and I know kind of a bunch of them, would probably be tickled pink to have an author contact them and say, hey, I'm writing a book and I need a little consult. And, sometimes, they might do it for free. Sometimes you might pay some minimal thing, but it's like, man, that's our jam. It's like, oh, so what would you do if somebody grabbed you like this? Oh, well, I got a lot of stuff. Let's talk about it. Yeah, don't be afraid to, even if you're not going to go and immerse yourself in a class or, a long-term program. Experts are out there, and you can go and just spend some time with them. I mean, heck, I'll do it for chocolate chip cookies. I'm easy. So
I'm gonna remember that.
yeah, just say, hey, look, I got some cookies for you. If you got, a half an hour to help me out with, okay. And then we can go over different situations. And there are so many different experts, just in our own area. I mean, we've got judo, we've got jujitsu, we got tai chi, kung fu people, we got MMA people all over the place. I mean, it's like, so you can generally find something, one of my best buddies in the world teaches Krav Maga like a maniac. He's awesome. So it's like you can find it somewhere and find somebody who can spend 10 minutes helping you with a scene that you never might have understood otherwise.
That's awesome. And something I've seen a lot of authors do who consult experts like you, or they maybe consult their local police department if they're doing like
exactly.
Yeah. I've also seen people like maybe they don't give them chocolate chip cookies, but I'll see them, in the acknowledgments, they'll list, thank you to so and so for their expertise in this area that I don't know about. And I know, like, for me, like, I would prefer that to like money, or, well, cookies are great, but I would like that too, because it means that like you had helpful impact, and people will know that like you had this impact on this author, which is really awesome. So I know people like to be on the acknowledgments for reasons like that.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
And I like what you were saying about showing the author the palm strike, because it made me think about I don't know if you read much young adult, but one of the tropes that I see get attacked a lot in young adult is like the young lady or young man who they have like no combat training, but they're the chosen one. So the demons or the bad guy come and attack them. Like, the demons and bad guy, have years of experience in being a villain. So they should be able to just like put the smackdown on this chosen one. But the chosen one with no combat training, like, miraculously defeats them without breaking a nail, without getting their hair out of place. And you can tell sometimes that those authors really haven't like thought about if that's realistic, which I think is why that trope gets a lot of hate. So maybe those authors could think about consulting a martial artist or somebody with expertise to say like, hey, we have this brand new person with no training. Like, how could they realistically either beat the bad guy or get away from the bad guy, which might be the more realistic way to take it.
Absolutely. Stun and run is it's an important concept. I think that is really important to try and find some answers. I mean, it's wonderful to be creative, and in our magical stories, I mean, yes, we have rules, but we're using magic, and so there are a lot of capabilities that could be explored, and just kind of write it off. It's like, well, they're magic and they're the chosen one, whatever. But it still can, not sit as well if that is not a good enough explanation. Like I'd been training for about 18 years, and I was a much better stand-up fighter. I mean, I kickboxing, stand-up fighting, and that was my jam. Kung Fu, all that. And then I had a judo seminar as my first time, and we did some grappling. And I had a guy hold me down on the floor for 2 minutes without using his hands. He just kind of laid on top of me and balanced, like this with, and he was coaching other people while I was struggling to get out from under him.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
kind of embarrassing. He's like, yeah, you loop your arm under his neck and you pull up, and then he looked down at me. You still got 2 minutes to go. And because I had no knowledge whatsoever, I had no clue. I had not a clue how to get out of that. And so the reason I tell you that story is to say, as an author, had I not experienced that or had someone express that situation to me, I probably would have written that in such a way that in our society today, where martial arts is so much more prevalent, a lot more people in the population might read that and go like, yeah, that would never work. And so things don't have to be perfect, but I think feasible. It's like, is that feasible? Does it feel feasible? And I think that that's one of the reasons that research is really important at any level, even if it's just looking something up on YouTube and being like, oh, that looks good and that looks big, and then using that in your description. That's definitely a place to start.
Exactly. And the thing I try to, remind other fantasy authors, and this, works for sci-fi too, is that even though we're writing something that's not realistic, we still have to obey certain levels of, reality, because
Mm-hmm.
unless we're writing some completely crazy world where there's no gravity and anatomy is totally off of what we know it,
Right.
then, the characters are going to behave in a lot of ways as we do today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I want to also remind our chatters, if you have questions about how to write combat or any other questions for Whit or I, please feel free to put that in the chat. We would love to hear from you. And we're going to go on to our example for hand-to-hand combat. I chose a little sample from one of your books that I really enjoyed and thought kind of showed this pretty well. So Whit, I will let you read that to us.
Okay. All right. This is from Grim Undertakings, the first book in the Grim Fairy Chronicles, and this is the Fey Assassin. And I believe he's fighting demons at this point. Anyway.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. I twisted so that I could plant a vicious Sparta kick on the third one, and I heard a satisfying snap as my foot connected with its sternum, breaking it like a cracker. It still managed to rake its claws down my leg as it flew away from me, and that hurt a lot. 2 down, 3 to go.
Awesome. And I kind of picked that because I liked that you didn't just include the actual physical descriptors, which are great and they help paint the picture, but then you included things like the satisfying snap. And then the demon didn't like it, but I really liked it breaking it like a cracker, because anybody, knows that sensation of breaking a saltine or a Ritz. And like, I read that and I was just like, ooh, I can like hear it and feel it. And it was just very, very visceral, very cool.
I'm very glad that you enjoyed it. I mean, that's what I'd hoped. I mentioned that Sparta kick, and I know that at some point in the future that will be a little bit dated, but most everybody that I know knows exactly what kind of kick I'm talking about and might have chuckled when they read it, but at least they probably know what it is.
Well, awesome. So thanks for reading that to us. And I think it's fun that we kind of got to break it down a little bit. So let's go on to our next topic, Taylor. So now we're going to take a look at some tips for writing combat involving weapons. And this can be any sort of weapon, from a broadsword to a crossbow to modern firearms, because really combat can apply to any type of genre, because most genres are going to have some kind of action sequence. You might need to know these things. So kind of like Whit was saying earlier, you definitely want to seek out experts. I like to watch YouTube videos, or you can also get documentaries, whether that's online through Netflix or Hulu, or checking them out from the library. And like Whit said earlier, to read a lot. And for this, it can be fiction or nonfiction books, because you might want to see how certain authors treat the weapons that you're trying to write about. And you may discover that, like my last point says, you don't have to be an expert in every detail. You don't know how to like put together a gun and how to clean it and all that stuff, unless you're really wanting to put that in there for your character. You just have to know the basics. And I watched a lot of YouTube videos because one of my characters uses a 6-gun, which I knew nothing about. And my characters, as you've heard with the baking, they like to do things that I don't know anything about. I think they do it to irritate me and to make me learn more. So I found this really cool YouTube channel that was a historical Old West reenactors. So there was this guy who showed you how to load his gun, how to fire, what to do if it recoiled. So that was kind of how I learned, to at least fake knowing how to use a 6-gun. So do you have any tips to add for combat with weapons or any other insight, Whit?
That's you did exactly what I would tell anybody to do. If it's something that you don't know about, I mean, there are so many resources out there that are just dying for you to come and get them. And so I knew a fantasy author many years ago that told me that people told him, man, you really write horses well. I mean, I've been around horses my whole life, and I really, and he leaned over to me and he said, I've never touched a horse. I don't know what, but I talk to a lot of folks. And so you don't have to have the hands-on. It helps, but it's more important to be able to convey the proper handling of stuff and how it acts and all that kind of thing. And if you can't do it yourself for whatever reason, I mean, I'm a martial arts instructor. That's my day job. Weapons are deductible for me. So I've got swords and spears and staffs and daggers. And I mean, I even had a replica of my fantasy weapon made so that I could play with it and see how it felt. And
That's awesome.
It felt 100% different than I expected. I had to go back and rewrite a bunch of stuff. But it's like, if you can't do that, and lay your hands on stuff and know what to do with it, then the best thing you can do is exactly what you did, is find some reference material that explains all that in terms that you can understand, and then turn around and use that. It's about painting a picture with your words.
So you probably don't have it nearby, but do you happen to have that your fantasy blade anywhere in the area for us to see?
Yeah, I actually have 2 versions of it. I can show you the real one, and then I can show you the cosplay version that I had made. I'll be right back.
Yes, we'd love to see it.
All right, fit in there?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, so this, it's this long. Hang on. It's got a big heavy ball on the end, which is not how it is in the book, but it balances the thing. This is a heavy steel blade. I'm not sure of the type of metal, but it can be sharpened. It's carbon steel, and it's in the shape of the fantasy weapon. I called it a jidan after making sure that made-up name didn't reference something obnoxious in another language. And it acts very much like a lot of the Chinese weapons, the long-bladed Chinese weapons that I learned how to use. And so, but boy, it's a heavy beast, this thing. The ones in my book are much lighter. And the cosplay version is up on the wall. I'll be back.
Okay. We didn't know we were going to get to see cool weapons, but since he has them available, we're going to take a peek.
All right, here I come. Okay. All right, now this was made by Miss Taylor Dunlap, who is amazing. And you could see here, I mean, it looks real, but it is foam and wood construction. Hang on, where's the end? And this is more proper at the bottom, because these are the magical gemstones that give these weapons their power. And so this is a representation of the Jidan of Storms. And there are 5 other ones, but I just had this one made because it's my favorite.
That is awesome. Thank you for showing us.
Anytime. Okay. Thanks for indulging me. Just not gonna fall. Okay, I'm back.
So you mentioned that when you were after you got the weapon to play with, you had to rewrite some things. I'm guessing you had to rewrite things showing that it was heavier or bulkier than you had thought originally.
No, I recognized that the version in my book was lighter
Mm.
and more maneuverable, but what I wasn't prepared for was just how maneuverable it truly was. Because even the heavy version, the I call it the prototype, even the heavy prototype version, it moves very, very smoothly and quickly, and it can lash out as a spear and snatch back and do a lot of close quarters fighting. Is way more maneuverable than I even expected it might be in my fantasy, in the story. So I got to go back in and kind of, really live it up a little and say, yeah, it actually can do these things. And so I think I put on my YouTube channel somewhere, I put a video of me using it a little bit, like, to show how it works. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
That's cool. I have to check out that video later. That sounds like a really interesting way to kind of learn how to write your weapon, like actually having it made and getting to play with it.
Yeah, if I ever get like really, really successful, I'm going to have somebody forge a really nice version.
Ooh, that would be nice.
Yeah,
Well,
it'll
we'll
be
hope
good.
you get there so when we have you on in the future, you can be like, here's the really awesome, beautiful forged version.
Thank you. Yes, I will happily show it to you.
Awesome. All right, well, Taylor, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now we have another example from one of Whit's books from his first book, Mage's Burden. So this is going to tell you more about writing a weapon. And I really like this one too. So Whit, all yours.
Okay. Now I don't do a very good lady voice. Anyway, this is a female mercenary who is being accosted in a bar, and it was such a bad idea for the guy who's doing it. Anyway, she says, "How dare you attack a lady?" Kieran bellowed in her most unladylike manner and turned to the standing thug to her left. Bleeding from a mashed face, the man screamed in rage and aimed two quick slashes at Kieran's side. She parried them without effort and caught an overhead slash on her guard. Before he could pull back, she slammed her left palm sharply upwards into his elbow. And so, with that, she would have the weapon in her right hand and she blocks it and then slams the other hand up into the elbow, uh, presumably dislocating it. And all of that stuff is stuff that I acted out. And, I just pretended someone was there and it's okay, bing, bing, block, pow, to make sure that something like that would work.
Awesome, very cool. And so I see now that we've seen your the weapon you showed us, and I'm looking at your new cover. So it looks like those are the same weapons that you just showed us too.
Yeah, exactly. Those play an integral part in the story. There are six of them. Each one grants a very specific power to the chosen user. And I kind of people ask me what the book's about. It's like, okay, it's Lord of the Rings meets the Avengers. Just it's fun. It's like that. And so yeah, the main guy in the back there, that's Brunar the Mage. He's the custodian of those. And when trouble arises, then new warriors are chosen who are destined to wield these things because they are suited to their particular powers.
Awesome. Well, that'll be a fun read for people who definitely enjoy fantasy. So hopefully some readers will check that out.
One could hope.
All right, let's go on to the next slide, Taylor. All right, so Whit and I both write fantasy, so this topic is near and dear to our hearts. So we're going to talk now about how to write magical combat. And that's something that you generally can't observe in real life unless you've gone to Vegas to see a show, but even then it's going to be probably fake. We don't really know for sure because they're very tricky there in Vegas. But so I listed some potential ways that people could learn to write about magical combat. You could watch movies for inspiration. There's so many options with different types of magic, whether you're writing elemental type. There's a lot of fantasy authors who are inspired by The Last Airbender and all the different types of bending. So you could use that to kind of base your magic on. And of course, my favorite is science, because what is magic but unexplained, as of yet, science? And I know there's even some fantasy books that kind of treat it that way, which is a really fun take on magic. And then, of course, the famous read other books in your genre to see how other authors handle magical combat. And something else you have to think about is that there's so many different magic systems. like my magic system is very different from Whit's magic system, and we're going to be very different from Robin Hobb or Brandon Sanderson's magic system. So you have to think about the ways that your mages or wizards might work in those contexts too. So you have anything to add for this, Whit?
No, I think that that's pretty much it. I mean, there's a lot of material out there, and since it's fantasy, you can do anything in the world that you want with your magic system. The key is being consistent with the rules of your system throughout your stories, so that you don't do one thing in one book and then in another book do something and the reader goes, wait, I didn't think they could do that. That's against the rules. And it's that is a real danger when you're working with something and you have total freedom to create that system any way you want, but you do have to keep track of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, and I think some authors end up writing themselves into plot holes or giving themselves grief and have to like retcon things. And I know one of the things I do to try to be consistent is I have like a series Bible. So one of my characters, he casts spells in a certain way, and I always forget what he needs for certain spells. So I have like in my
Right.
series Bible, like, okay, this is what he uses for this, and like this is
Right.
what he can do.
That's readers catch on to that kind of thing. Readers catch on to that kind of thing, and they'll remember it, and they'll tell you you were wrong about your own stuff.
Yeah, and that's the good and bad thing about fans. Like when you've got fans who are that excited about your stuff, they'll definitely correct you, which can be very humbling for a writer or person in Hollywood, whoever's getting the feedback that way. Lots of game designers get that too.
Right. I would be
I play
thrilled
World
to
of
have somebody
Warcraft, so
stolen my
they're always
stuff.
getting comments from the players about, oh, you retconned this, it's not supposed to
Mhm.
work that way. So it's in every creative industry.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now it's my turn. This is an example from my second book that just released November 1st, Ephagist. And because I know Whit hasn't read this one yet, I took out some potential spoilers. So this is over the course of like a page in the book, but I was very careful to not put spoilers in there so that Whit or other people aren't like, oh, well, you spoiled that scene for me. All right, so here we go. Blaze threw up a hand as a shield, preferring to break his fingers than lose an eye. He felt the itch of his magic swarming across his palm, coating his skin. Blaze gathered his magic, concentrating it in his raised hand. He didn't stop there, pushing it out. Blaze grunted with the exertion of forcing his magic out into a brief, shimmering shield, reminiscent of a soap bubble. So that's how I treated his particular magic in this scene, which for those who've read Breaker, he's had some magical growth from then. So that's another thing you can think about when you're writing combat too, that just like people learn martial arts, your character can learn new ways to use their magic in combat, which that's what happened to Blaze in this particular scene.
I love it. This is awesome.
All right, let's go on to our next type of combat. Okay, so next, we can't leave animals or other creatures out because they might be in combat too. So we're familiar with our household pets, so we may know how our cat or dog may fight. But what about a wolf or a dragon or a Pegasus? You have to think about ways that they might behave because not very many people will see a wolf fighting in real life with their own eyes, and I'm pretty sure most people wouldn't see a dragon or Pegasus fighting with their own eyes. And so since I write about some different fantastic creatures like that, one of the ways I think about writing them is watch YouTube videos or documentaries about animals similar to that creature. So for like my Pegasus, I have lots of Pegasus characters. So their fighting is based on what you would see in like a wild horse, but also different birds of prey because they are aerial creatures. So for example, at the end of Breaker, I have to be careful how I word this, so it's not a spoiler for the people who haven't read Breaker. that there is a scene where Blaze's Pegasus Imrys is coming down to attack somebody who has Blaze cornered. And I tried to, see what kind of bird Imrys would be based on, because I wanted him to have his hind legs extended, like he was going to slam into this bad guy. And so I looked and I found out that that's the way that ospreys, I think it's how they land in the water with their legs extended and their wings back. So I had him come in this particular scene like an osprey for that particular battle. So I thought that was pretty cool to base it on a real actual bird. And then, of course, you can also read books, both fiction and nonfiction books, to discover more about creature combat. So there are other authors that write about how dragons fight, how Pegasus fight, or unicorns, or demons, because we'll call demons creatures for our purpose, because you might have like a multi-limbed demon who might fight like a spider or something. So you can be creative that way with your creatures. Anything you want to add for that, Whit?
No, I think that's fantastic. I really like how you you researched both of the animals in question here, because it's a combined being and has traits of both of those. Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to go about it.
And one of our moderators, Jackie, just mentioned I'm pretty sure it's a juvenile nonfiction series. It's called the Who Would Win books, and they take different creatures, like who would have been a shark or an orca, and then they kind of compare and contrast them. So that can also give authors an idea. And that's something I didn't put here, but don't underestimate the juvenile books, especially in nonfiction, because they really lay things out in a way that anybody can understand, which I love them for that reason. Like if you need to know how the Sistine Chapel was built, it'll be easier to look at a juvenile book for that than an adult book. The adult book's probably gonna make your brain melt or something.
Right.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is another example from Ephegist, and I kept this one short to avoid more spoilers. And this is a Pegasus who is fighting. The gray mare was a looming shadow in the smoke, striking out with wicked hooves, battering with her wings and harrying her attackers with snapping teeth. So in that example, you can see she's doing both raptor behaviors, trying to attack something with her wings, but also horse behaviors. And a lot of people who don't know horses and how to write them, they think, oh, they're such nice creatures. But if you see videos of them, like their teeth are not anything to think are like easy. Like I've been bitten by a horse before. It hurts. I've been kicked by a horse before and got I was really little, so I got ejected several yards. So those are things that you have to respect. And so when you write a horse or a Pegasus or a unicorn fighting, they're not going to be a lightweight. They're going to be a
Right.
scary thing to fight.
Yeah. Those are the natural weapons that they would use, for both animals. And you have a combined animal, so you would think that they would use every type of weapon at their disposal. I mean, that's just, that's natural.
Exactly. And writers need to remember too that even animals that are usually prey, like a horse at its very basic level is a prey animal. But if they get cornered or in a fight, they're gonna use the weapons they have.
Yeah, they'll still fight. Yeah.
Yep. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, now for historical combat. So writers depicting anything historical often have to figure out the best way to depict accurate combat without including anachronisms. And that can be really a challenge. There's lots of historical fiction writers who they've gotten dinged for it. Because those historians will come in and they're like, well, but actually, this is how it happened.
Right.
So here we have some tips to help those people out. So again, we're always going to go back to seek out experts. But for this, you can also think about reenactors. Like if you're writing, something medieval, go hang out at the Renaissance Festival. See if you can talk with one of the guys who does the joust or the Highland games where they make all the cool weapons go everywhere. See if you're hey, can I talk to you, when you're no longer at the Renaissance Festival to see how this works? Because like the martial arts instructors, they might be like, oh, this is cool. Yeah, I'll talk to you about it.
there is a group out there now, and one of the fellows in our Jiu-Jitsu association, his name is Anthony Barnabeo, runs the local group, and it's a heavy armored combat group. And so, I mean, they're dressed head to foot in metal helmets, breastplates. I mean, the whole nine yards in terms of actual armor. And they are fighting each other with metal weapons. These are heavy metal weapons. They're simply blunted, and they don't allow stabbing. And they are beating the crud out of each other out there. I've been front row watch. Of course, I was there front row watching. Like, oh, this is going to be good, and I was not disappointed because they are really trying to, they're really trying to nail each other with that stuff, and it's very educational. The very first time you watch one match, you'll start seeing stuff that works and stuff that doesn't, and be like, oh yeah, that would, oh, I'd be done right there. I mean, and so especially this time of year down here where the Renaissance Festival is in play, fantasy authors, really, that would help. If you're writing that kind of combat, go out there and check those guys out. It'll be educational.
Yep, and a lot of fun too, because who
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
enjoy that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's awesome to know there's a local group that does that, because I had no idea. So for people who, want to write really medieval stuff, they could probably talk to them about like how the armor feels, because
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They're
something
so
you don't know
nice.
otherwise.
All those guys are guys and ladies, and there's ladies out there that fight too, and oh boy, everybody's tough. And they're so sweet. They're dying to talk to you about it and answer any questions that you'd like. I mean, they are ferocious and sweet at the same time. So, just if anybody wants to try and get a hold of any of those folks, I mean, just contact me. I mean, I'll send you in the right direction.
Awesome. Yeah, that might really help some of our local authors. Great. And then, of course, other tips, we're going to always go back to watching YouTube videos and documentaries if you can't get your hands on one of these experts.
Yeah.
Or you're writing late at night and you don't want to bother one of these experts. And then, of course, read those fiction and nonfiction books. If you're writing epic fantasy with a great battle scene, maybe go check out Lord of the Rings, see what Tolkien did there, and maybe try to emulate it. And then, of course, also remember that you don't have to be an expert in every detail. You don't have to show every single parry, every single blow. Just do your best to kind of at least outline the action that's happening. But like Whit showed us in his earlier combat examples, you can use other senses, like something like snapping like a cracker, to kind of get across what you're trying to convey to your reader. You use those details. All right, well, let's go to the next slide. All right, so this is an example from my first book, Breaker. And this is talking about six guns, which, as I mentioned earlier, I had to go to YouTube and find some really awesome Old West reenactors to figure things out. Jack snickered. Next time, keep your thumb against the recoil shield. Then you can put pressure against the back of the six gun and it'll keep it from bouncing up. Acts like a counterweight. Blaze blinked at the constructive feedback. Oh, thanks. And so that was something I actually heard the gentleman talking about on the YouTube channel. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm a newbie. I would have no idea about this. I would be like Blaze, probably having the gun bouncing all around. So I was like, I'm going to put that in my book, because that's, very authentic and actual feedback that you could give somebody. All right, well, let's go to our next slide. So here are just some general fight scene tips. So remember, you don't need to give the reader an actual blow-by-blow account. Like you're not the announcer at the WWE fight, like saying what's happening. But trust your reader's imagination. I know there have been some fantasy books I've read where I don't know if they were trying to like pad their word count, but they've done the blow-by-blow, and I end up skimming because I lose track of like their hand is here and then their hand is here. And then their hand is suddenly somewhere else. And I'm like, well, can their hand be in this other somewhere else? Like, is that realistic? And I'm like, I can't deal with this. Like, where's the next dialogue that can tell me what's going on? So trust your readers' imaginations, and you can put in those little details like the Sparta kick, and then go to snapping somebody like a cracker, and we'll be very happy with that. And then also focus on the sensory details like the taste, the smell, the feelings of things, the visual cues you can give. And like Whit was talking to us about the local reenactors with the armor, like if you're fighting, that armor is going to weigh you down, so you should write about that. And like you don't have to show like the swords always hitting each other or the sword hitting, you know, them in the chest. Show the feel of that heavy armor and the sweat like that's pouring down them in there. And also you can use short sentences to help move the action along quickly. Any other tips you want to add for that, Whit?
No, I mean, I'm right there with you. There are several scenes in my epic fantasy where like armies or a handful of people are fighting against an army in a situation. So there's a whole bunch of attackers and one person is trying to fend them off. And in something like that, I am far less apt to use a blow by blow, because it's like, well, it's going to feel overwhelming anyway. It's going to be a giant flailing mess, even for my one character that's like, a super cool fighter guy. It's like I would much more readily mention that he whirls and stabs and kicks and dodges, and opponents fall left and right, something like that, versus, he planted his left foot and stabbed this guy, and then he stepped over here and then blocked up here, and then he, because that there's time for blow by blow, and there's a time for let's move this along, shall we? And so, and it's just up to the author to figure out what comes when.
Yeah, exactly. And like one of our moderators, Jackie, just commented that she always skips the fights. And so she might have an experience of too much blow by blow, too much
Right.
like not keeping track of people. So she wants to get on with it too sometimes.
Right.
So use those other things to keep your reader hooked on what's going on. All right, let's go to our next slide. So combat has consequences. So one thing to remember when you're writing about your characters getting in some kind of fight is that your character shouldn't walk away unscathed. Sometimes we write about characters, they might get away unscathed physically, because you don't always want to have your character, have the, end up bloodied and bleeding and everything. But also remember that for combat, in addition to physical wounds, they may have psychological ones, or even if they don't, if they're a hardened warrior, they need to have some kind of reaction to what happened next, or in the next scene. Unless you're writing a sociopath, like maybe they have no reaction and they're just like, okay, I'm going to go to Wendy's now.
Right.
But otherwise, your character probably needs to have some kind of reaction or consequences to the fight.
I totally agree. I mean, we kind of have a saying around here. It's like, in talking about self-defense, it's like, look, everybody's going to get hurt. They're going to get hurt. You're going to get hurt. The key is to see who gets hurt less and
Yes,
who can walk away, first. And so yeah, I think that is really important. And in terms of physical combat, yeah, it's like if the guy never gets touched ever, or if the lady never gets touched ever, it lessens the experience, I think. It's like, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. That's how come I get so excited about Kryptonite for Superman. It's like, oh, now we got to fight, because before it's like, I am completely invulnerable and you can do nothing against me. Well, that's not really all that fun. And so, yeah, they should suffer a little bit when they're fighting. And something else too that I really like to try and work with in my stuff is that in magical combat, magic costs. It's not free. I mean, if you're using a magical implement, I mean, and again, every rule system is different, but it should cost you. Bigger the spell, the more wore out you are.
Yep.
I've got characters that, there are certain things that they may try to do that'll leave them senseless for a while and very vulnerable because they did something that was kind of beyond them strength-wise. And other implements may have other negative effects if you use them too much, or in some cases at all. It's like, don't use the wand on the end. it's a bad idea, you know. And so, yeah, I think any kind of combat, there has to be consequences. Otherwise, it doesn't feel right.
And that makes it more fun for the reader too. And I know there's a lot of authors, especially new authors, it's like, oh, I love this character, I don't want bad things to happen to them. But I saw a meme when I posted on my author stuff recently that it was talking about the characters being like a glow stick. And
Yeah,
then you snap the glow stick to make them shine. And so that's what I like to do to my characters. It's like, oh, this guy, just got shot in the chest. Well, he's going to be okay because he's a main character. I don't go George R.R. Martin on them, but
right.
he's going to really regret it.
Yeah. No, it's strength is born of struggle. Not easy living. And so, yeah, it's like they grow from all the times that they're hurt and struggles that they face. They grow from all those. No struggles, no growth.
Yeah, and I really take the whole what doesn't kill you make you stronger to heart for my characters. So it's like that they might wish that they're dead by the time I'm done with them, but darn it, they're going to be really strong at the end of it.
Cool.
All right, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, and these are some questions for our chatters, if we have any to kind of help us answer, and if not, we'll kind of go over them too. This is about hurting your characters. So if you're like Whit and I, are not afraid to make them suffer, think about some realistic responses to these happening to your character. Like in the picture, like breaking glass with a fist, getting hit in the head, getting stabbed or getting cut, getting punched, getting shot. So in the comments, go ahead and think about how a character might react to that. Go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll read your thoughts on it too. So Whit, have you had any in that list happen to your characters? And if so, how did you handle it?
Oh yeah. Okay. First thing, let's talk about concussions. If you get one concussion, you will likely be a mess for a while, and you will be in danger for a while. These characters that get knocked out, and then they are perfectly fine for the next 2 hours, and then they get knocked out again, and then they wake up and they're perfectly fine, and then it's like, yeah, that's not it, Chief. So I would say just kind of be careful of that. I love knocking people out, but it's mostly bad guys, because I know what's going to happen if one of my good guys gets knocked out. They're going to have to recover. And another thing that if you choke someone unconscious, unless you kill them, the moment you let go, they're going to wake up again. The blood flow to the brain comes right back. I mean, you give them about 5-8 seconds, and they're going to, what happened? Did I win? They'll wake up. And so that's something. It's like, just because you snuck up behind the bad guy and choked him unconscious, you might want to tie him up in a hurry or cast a spell or something, because if you choked him out, he's going to wake up when you let him go, unless you killed him. These are things. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
That could be a fun way, though, if you want to like have the main character make a mistake that they're going to regret. Like maybe they don't know that because they're the newbie YA character we were talking about, but they're going to learn after that to not to do that.
Right. Yeah, I've got plenty of folks choking people out, but like generally they're right there to do something with them right after, because they've done this before.
Yep, exactly. And Jackie in chat put that she once tried to break a car window with a brick and she couldn't do it. And so she thinks of that every time she sees a character that tries to break a window with their fist.
Yeah, it's actually harder to do than they think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why they make the special things you can keep in your car to where, like, if you get stuck in a river or a flood, you can like break your window with it.
Yep.
But it's good to know that a brick apparently is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
So I kind of used, well, I used several of these in my writing. So actually one of my, and this won't be a spoiler for Effigies, but one of my favorite things towards the end is what one of the characters, like, he's trying to get in a window, but Blaze is a breaker, so he breaks with his magic. He doesn't have to do the whole like hitting it with his fist thing. But glass shatters, glass is sharp. So when he's going in the window, he cuts his hand on the glass, and so So that's like the big injury he sustains in his scene, and the other characters are like, oh, are you hurt? What hurt you? And he's like, I didn't have a really good time with that window, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, and I was just looking at the list here. It's like, yeah, what happens when you get punched? You can watch some MMA fights and see what happens. If you're all in the moment, it's going to hurt you or it's going to knock you out. You can fight through them depending, but there's a lot of little things in that. Well, it depends. And getting shot, a lot of movies, it's like, I shoot you with a handgun and you go flying back 10 feet. Yeah, not so much. So,
They
again,
fly back and then they get right up again and start punching the guy.
oh, right. Yeah, yeah. So, those are the kinds of things that realistic responses, research can help so that you can be as realistic as possible, even in a magical fantasy environment. It's like there are still rules. They're just bendy, but they're still rules.
Yep. And Elizabeth commented that she thinks there's a good balance between someone not necessarily going down after just one hit, because that's too boring, which she's right, but also not never feeling the impact of injuries.
No, you
So
got to feel it. Yeah, that stuff adds up.
And I know when I wrote one of my characters, Jack, he's always getting into fights because that's his vibe. I have him get in a fight in a bar and he's doing great, but then he gets punched, which I've never been punched, and I'm gonna knock on wood and hope I stay that way. But I had to go, I went and did my research to see, like, what does that feel like? How do you feel after that happens to you, so that I could be accurate for that. So that it's also very interesting when you research the stuff to see, like, I've never felt that, but when you research it, you're like, okay, I understand more about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanted to show a couple of resources that I use in my writing, and my characters hate these books. There's Hurting Your Characters, which I don't think we have this one in the library system, but maybe I'll see if we can get it added. So this one is fun, and well, my characters don't think it's fun. And then there's A Writer's Guide to Wounds and Injuries, Body Trauma.
Ooh.
So if you want to know about all the injuries your characters can sustain different ways, like they cover, like, if you get shot, if you sprain your ankle, if you get a concussion, like they go into really in depth about the concussion, if you get like chest injuries. So it's very, very helpful.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
All right, do we have any more slides, Taylor? I've lost track. I think we do. Okay, so the big takeaway from this is that if you don't have experience in any of the fighting that you're writing about or thinking about, you don't have to be an expert to write it. You just have to do your research to make it accurate. All right, and I know Whit has to leave us in a moment to go to his class to do his 40-hour-a-week gig, but I do want to thank you, Whit, for joining us, and I want to thank all of our viewers who joined us as we discussed how to write fight scenes. And Whit and I really hope this will help inspire your own writing. And we're going to give a shout out to some of our chatters. So thanks to Jackie and to Elizabeth for taking part in this. We really appreciate it. And as a reminder, we still have many virtual programs we're hosting for NaNoWriMo. So please join us again next Tuesday, November 16th, when we discuss how to build your characters and make them realistic, because even if your characters are fighting, they still need to be realistic in other ways. So we're going to give you the full way of making your characters really realistic. So, Whit, anything you want to say to the viewers before you head out?
I thank you so much for the opportunity. I loved being here. If anybody has any questions, especially any authors out there, and if I can help in any way, please don't hesitate to contact me. I love to help folks. So I'm here if you need me.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, but we'll let you get to our class. And thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in. Don't forget, you can see all of our programs at hcpl.net or on our YouTube feed or on Facebook Live. Thank you.